Hi, and welcome to the Gamuation YouTube channel. Today we're going to do something new. I've always enjoyed playing Magic the Gathering when I was younger, and I played quite a bit of Dungeons and Dragons as well. Now, Wizards has seen fit to combine the two, and has released up until now 2 sets of cards fully themed around Dungeons and Dragons. So I figured this is the perfect chance to have a look at some cards and talk about some role-playing lore. So sit back and watch me open a booster and talk about the cards that come up.
It's time for Boost and Tell.
And what do we have here? We have a beautiful art card, which is actually signed gold ink by Justine. Look at that.
Now this is a bit of a tricky one to start with, as there doesn't seem to be a Nemesis Phoenix in Dungeons & Dragons as far as I could find. There is, however, a Nemesis feat in the Book of Exalted Deeds, which allowed a character to gain additional abilities to face off against their favoured enemy. Their nemesis, you might say. The Phoenix, however, is a different story. This bird has come by in many tales, both in Dungeons & Dragons and of course other lore. It's usually described as a type of bird which consists almost entirely of flames, but with the special ability to be reborn from the ashes, just like a fire can be rekindled, if it is still sparkling a bit. They're usually also seen as champions of good, but I guess that all depends on who you ask. They tend to live on the elemental plane of fire, and, interestingly enough, they're only male. They reproduce purely by self-immolation and rebirth. Outside of D&D, it's actually a bit of a difficult debate, with the origin either being Egyptian, the Greek phoenix, or Chinese mythology. It's called Feng Huang. Interesting enough, the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl also threw itself to fire to be reborn, and this was a feathered snake. So perhaps all these stories are connected somehow.
That's a good start, I'd say. Now, next card we find, we have a forest with a very nice fantasy-like look, I feel. Beautiful. Val, the Candlekeep Researcher, which is a legendary creature, human wizard. I think this is also one of the art ones.
Now Val might not be very known as a person, but the Candlekeep is a very well-known location when it comes to the Forgotten Realms. Candlekeep is, or was, a library fortress, known for their amazing skyline rising above the Sword Coast. It's situated on a small bit of rock on a very narrow peninsula. This Candlekeep is mainly run by a group called the Avowed, and I think Val as a researcher would probably be a part of this order. These monks are great people of learning and will defend the availability of knowledge. Though not the official government, they are pretty much running the show. Their one law they will always uphold is the forbidding of the destruction of knowledge enforced by banishment. This also went for violence, theft, damaging, or just copying the contents of anything in the library. No mercy.
Looking at very nice. Right, then we're getting to our common. I believe we have our Zentarim Bandit, a halfling rogue. It's kind of silly. There's a kind of cool look to it. I think it's more of a bard if I look at him.
The Zentarim are known as a band of mercenaries in the Forgotten Realms, originally going under the name Black Network. It is an organization of rogues, warlocks, but later on also assassins, spies, and pretty much an entire army. At some point in history they found themselves allied with the Church of Bane, a religious organization dedicated to worshipping the deity called Bane. Dedicated to eventually ruling the entirety of all the lands along the Sword Coast. They are a dangerous organization, to say the least.
You're confronted by robbers. Yes, that is definitely something that would do. Actually allows us to choose a certain action. Interesting.
Now you might not think so, but this tends to happen a lot in D&D sessions, especially when you have a bard. If anything, if you have a bard and you tell them a secret, chances are they will tell someone about it. Now bards might be known mainly as masters of music and words, but in general I tend to see bards a bit differently. They're very hard to play properly, I find, when it comes to D&D. If you do find a party where a player wants to play a bard, and has an active interest in role-playing, you probably want that person to have some kind of affinity with music, culture, or something similar. If not, you might end up having to listen to someone pulling on a cat's tail and believing them meowing to be as great a melody as Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody. So all I can say is simply this: if you play with a bard, keep your gold close and your earplugs closer.
Interesting. We have our first dragon. It is a common dragon, I see. The Oceanus dragon. I think it looks a bit like a Leviathan. Like the Leviathan from Final Fantasy 15 it was, I think.
The Oceanus dragon is a bit of a weird one between the dragons. In fact, it's more of an amphibious creature than the general flying creature we know and sometimes love. If anything, I think it looks more like Leviathan or some kind of sea serpent instead of a sea dragon. Now, sea serpents are probably more well known to you under different names, like Leviathan, the Hydra, and even Jormungandr, when we look at Norse mythology. This Oceanus dragon is obviously not as large as these amazing creatures, but I think they might have been quite the inspiration for this one. They are seen as some kind of benevolent guard, always guarding the river they live in, called Oceanus, in the upper plains.
Next up, Universal Solvent.
This special item might not seem as much when you first look at it. Oh, it's some kind of solvent. But like many things in Dungeons and Dragons, if you try to take a look outside of the box, you might find something incredibly dangerous in these simple things. This solvent is supposedly capable of dissolving any kind of adhesive in existence. Let that sink in. Any kind of adhesive. We're not just talking about the white glue you used in kindergarten. We're talking Gorilla Glue, cement, or anything else that causes some form of stickiness. And not just a little area. It dissolves a square foot of adhesive, including the so-called sovereign glue, which can pretty much make anything stick permanently. Just imagine using a little bit of this stuff on the side of a castle. You'd pretty much crush the entire structural integrity of the building and could just walk in. Who could stop you?
A Meteor Golem. Uncommon. Artifact creature. There's a very serious look to it, I think. It looks a bit like one of those Fallout power armors.
Now, the Meteor Golem. To the initiated in Magic the Gathering, he might seem weird here. After all, isn't the Meteor Golem a creature originally from Magic the Gathering itself? It was there in the core set of 2019. And you would be right. However, the Meteor Golem is also known as a homebrew monster for the 3.5 edition of Dungeons & Dragons. Unlike regular stone golems, these are much harder to find, as you probably expected. They're about 3.5 meters tall. and weigh about 2,000 kilograms. Very hard to create as well, as only wizards of epic levels or beyond are capable of crafting creatures of such complexity. And of course, finding enough materials is quite the endeavour itself, if not just incredibly costly to get to.
A fireball.
Ah, Fireball. One of the signature spells of the Dungeons and Dragons universe. In fact, the only spell I'd say is connected to D&D as much or more is the Magic Missile spell. This spell is actually so old, it was there when D&D came out with its very first edition. Quite a favourite with wizards and sorcerers alike. Though you might wish to be careful around these wizards, as this spell is not as good at recognizing friend from foe. So should you be in close contact with another enemy, you'd better pray your magic-y friend does not throw a fireball your way. Of course, unless you're some kind of fire creature. I'm sure you just dance along with it then.
Next up, Thunder Wave. Cast by a halfling wizard, it looks like. Ooh, that is an interesting effect as well.
This one threw me off when I first saw it. I thought Thunderwave would be something like Pikachu would throw out and just jolt your enemy or paralyze them. But no. Apparently this spell is a sonic spell. A low-level spell. It creates some kind of blast of sound so loud it causes bodily harm and moves enemies away from its caster. Sounds frightful. Maybe if you put on some old white robes and a wig of long hair, you could use it and pretend to be a banshee.
Next up, Cloud Kill. Gorgeous. Just look at that poison fog coming through.
And another spell it is. Cloud Kill is pretty much what it sounds like. You could compare it to a gas attack or biological warfare in that it poisons whoever stays in its reaches. And it does not stop there. Apparently you don't even need to breathe to suffer the nasty effects of this cloud. It will affect you either way. This cloud is also quite heavy, so maybe you could use it on top of a tower and then slowly watch it go down the tower, wiping out any and all resistance inside. Just sounds nasty. Of course, it does have one very major weakness. Wind.
A rare, legendary creature, human warlock, Will, the Blade of Frontiers. Look at that art style. Very pretty. Especially with that effect up here.
Quite the cocky and self-centered individual. This warlock runs around the Sword Coast hunting monsters, fighting with a rapier with which he pokes and prods. He sticks his nose in most things which will grant him more power. The scar on his face was a gift from a female minotaur when he was hunting her. And his other eye is devoid of colour and a kind of stone, it seems. Not much else is known about him yet, having only appeared in the video game Baldurs Gate 3, apart from this card, of course.
Next, another legendary enchantment, the Acolyte of Bahamut, the dragon. That suits our dragon theme quite well.
We're going back to the dragons with this card, as an Acolyte of Bahamut is a worshipper or maybe even a priest of this incredible dragon of justice. You might even call Bahamut a deity, and some do. Known as one of, if not the first, of the great dragons, he is a platinum dragon, and the eternal rival of his sister, Tiamat, who in turn is the queen of chromatic dragons. There's a great deal of lore to delve into when it comes to Bahamut, but for now, let's stick to the probably humanoid acolyte which this card actually represents. Now, Bahamut only accepts clerics of the utmost proper, and they mean good, alignment. His clerics are usually dragons themselves, if lesser dragons, but there are non-draconic clerics known to be in existence. They would usually learn about the teachings of Bahamut from a gold or silver dragon worm, which was then in humanoid form. Though mayhap Bahamut himself occasionally taught these people. He really enjoyed wandering the world in humanoid form, sometimes seen as an old man with canaries at the side of the road, which in turn led to mimicry by these clerics, who as of yet now also sit at the roads with a box of trained canaries.
Then, foil, legendary enchantment. It is a veteran soldier. That's a very shiny card. Very shiny. A very pretty effect. Now I find that the Magic the Gathering foils, they pretty much always just have a nice sparkle to them, whereas the Pokemon cards tend to have usually some issues in their foils.
Now this sounds like a doozy, right? Well, yes, it is just a soldier, only with more experience. However, it does actually have its own entry in the basic rules of Dungeons and Dragons, which states that they are professional fighters who take up arms for either something they believe in or value. That sounds very generic, because it is, of course. Couldn't you just call anyone who has a lot of experience a veteran? And if you do, does that mean they're always capable of the skill multi-attack? Oh, D&D, you silly game.
Next up, the Altar of Baal, a rare artifact which allows you to do, I think, 2 things, if I look at it correctly. A sorcery adventure. Does that mean it's either a sorcery or an adventure? I might have to look that up.
We're going back into some lore again, because the Altar of Baal, of course, belongs inside the Church of Baal. Baal is the god of violence and murder. Originally part of a group of adventurers who sought path to godhood, also known as the Dead Three. This group consisted of 3 rather large characters: Bane, the Lord of Darkness, Merkel, the Lord of Bones, and of course Baal, the Lord of Murder. Obviously sounds like a very nice bunch of people to hang around with, wouldn't you say? As a god of murder, his worshippers and servants, who we call Baalists, do his bidding. They wear deep black robes, a bit like the Black Hand in the Elder Scrolls games, and will serve their master quite willingly. They see murder not as a duty, but as pleasure, and believe that every murder strengthened their master's power. In fact, this murder was so important, they believed it necessary to kill every 10 day. A 10 day is 1/3 of a month approximately, so of course 10 days. Eventually, should these priests become really powerful, they could even cause instant death to a target by merely pointing at them. And the best part? These victims would come back as zombies to serve them.
What did we get? What do we get? Bane, the Lord of Darkness. We have found a god in our cards. Gorgeous. That is a rare foil. Really like that.
Quite a coincidence to see just after the altar of Baal. Here we have one of the members of the Dead Three himself. Bane, the Lord of Darkness, has arrived. The god of tyrannical oppression, terror, and hate. He is the epitome of dread to Faerun. Important note here. Bane of the Forgotten Realms as we see him here is a different god than Bane of the core Dungeons & Dragons lore, because making things easier to understand would just be useful. Looking at you, wizards. Right, back to Bane. Unlike many of the other evil gods, Bane will actually work together with others to further his goals. He is highly intelligent, or at least appears so, and has worked alongside different gods like Maglubiet, Tiamat, and he called Baal his servant for a period of time. He prefers to stay at a distance, though, savouring the terror and hatred formed in mortals' hearts, and using his schemes to gain control of the realms. His abilities allow him to take control of an individual and twist their appearance into a twisted black monster to slay his enemies. Should he ever be forced to come into close contact, though, he will simply punch his enemies hard enough using his black hand, which is so powerful it can cleave through an enemy onto the next in a brutal, gory display of violence.
And then I guess a token, not a token, another card. 1,000 Winds. Elemental creature, that is beautiful. Oh, I like that art style. That is very cool. It's a wind elemental, I believe.
The last card of our pack, and it's not even an actual Dungeons & Dragons card. It is in fact a card from the list, which is a rotating set of cards which can occasionally be in a booster pack. So it's like an extra surprise. In this case, we have an air elemental, which of course you could find in Dungeons & Dragons. Air elementals are living creatures made up completely of air and live on the elemental plane of air. They have the ability to change the shape of their bodies. They're made of gas, after all, and as such can become either incredibly tiny or incredibly tall. Weirdly enough, they do need to eat, and what they consume is air itself. I wonder, does that make them cannibals? And with that, we've reached the end of this booster. What was your favourite card, and what would you like to hear about more? Leave a comment in the section below. And if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps us out. I hope to see you all again soon.